had to go to the SharkDawg on them from the Stallions, from the Giddy Up. So I went SharkDawg, and then I ran to my sideline right away instead of their sideline.
You went SharkDawg.
Yeah, SharkDawg. Half shark, half dog. It's my spirit animal.
Shark. Shark.
Believe it or not, Scooby Wright is retiring. And believe it or not, it's week 5 of the UFL. We're halfway there to the end of the regular season. So we've got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about the Scooby News. We're going to talk about the upcoming game against the Houston Roughnecks, formerly the Houston Gamblers, who have been the Stallions' kryptonite over the last couple of years. And we're going to talk about what the Stallions need to do to avoid an upset in this mid-season USFL conference battle. And then we're going to talk about everything else going on around the UFL and with the Stallions so far over the past week. So thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the show.
Here we go. Hey, giddy up on 3. 1, 2, 3. Giddy up.
You can feel the buzz when you're around this city. People have fallen in love with the Birmingham Stallions. Here we go. We're getting a little juice going.
And Birmingham is going to win the USFL championship.
We've got a good bit to talk about today, so I'm actually just going to jump straight in with my keys to the game. I'm not going to give a super in-depth breakdown here, but I just want to mention 3 keys to the game that the Stallions need to do in order to avoid an upset this weekend against the Houston Roughnecks. The number 1 key to the game, in my opinion, is we have to win the battle in the trenches. The Stallions have been doing that up until last week. I felt like last week against DC was the first week where we really got sort of more kind of manhandled or sort of outplayed physically in the trenches. The defense had 0 sacks, which is a shocking stat considering they had 17 going into that game and over the course of 3 games. They also gave up 90 rushing yards, which previously they were averaging only 42 rushing yards per game, giving up 42 yards. So more than double what their average was. So, you know, didn't get a lot of pressure on the quarterback, didn't really do a great job stopping the run. And then on the offensive side of the ball, we really struggled. We gave up 4 sacks, and CJ Marable, our starting running back, had 14 rushes for only 19 yards, so barely averaged a yard per carry. So this week, going up against arguably the best running back in the league in Mark Thompson, and going up against one of the best front sevens on the Houston side of the ball, we can't have that sort of performance again. We have to be able to shut down Mark Thompson, and we have to be able to protect the quarterback and be able to run the ball on our side of things whenever the ball is in our possession. The good news is that, as we'll talk about later on the show, we should see a healthy dose of Adrian Martinez this week. So I think with his legs, if nothing else, we should be able to kind of create some things in the run game. Also, Ricky Person Jr., again, who we'll talk about later in the show, is going to be starting for us this week, and I really like that. I feel like he's been our best offensive player so far this season, so I'm really excited to see what he can do as sort of the starting running back. And for the Roughnecks, Toby Johnson, their all-USFL defensive tackle, who is just a massive man and one of the best players in this league, is not going to be playing in this game. So that also sort of helps us out a little bit in terms of what we have to go up against in the trenches. And, again, we'll talk about these guys towards the end of the show too, but we got a couple linemen back from last week who were injured and didn't get to play. We kind of had a different configuration on the O-line than the first couple games of the season. So I feel good about our chances to kind of get back into the groove that we were in to start the year and kind of move beyond what wasn't our best performance last week in terms of the line of scrimmage against DC. My second key to the game is that we have to play mistake-free. If you go back and watch the episode I released at the beginning of the week, you know, and if you watch the game, you know that we made crazy mistakes, uncharacteristic, unfortunate mistakes against DC. Just consider the first 3 offensive possessions we had. Fumble at the 2-yard line, fumble at the 3-yard line, blocked punt. I mean, and ideally in a game, you want to avoid any of those things ever happening once. But to have 3 plays like that in the first half of the game was really just atrocious. So we can't have that happen again this week against a Houston team that just got their first win under their belt, starting to kind of figure some things out on offense, has gotten Mark Thompson back in the rotation. You know, they're trending in a good direction. They've gotten some momentum, and they really need this win to kind of, you know, keep their hopes alive of making the playoffs. So can't let them hang around by shooting ourselves in the foot like we did last week. My third key for the game is I'd like to see us get Jay Sternberger involved. Tight end Jay Sternberger is one of our best players on the offensive side of the ball, and for the most part, he's been pretty quiet so far this year. He actually only has 8 catches, so that's 2 catches per game. One of those was for a touchdown, which was on a tip pass, if you remember that. But when he has caught the ball, he's averaging almost 20 yards per catch. So, I mean, that goes to tell you when we've gotten the ball in his hands, it's been usually a big first down, a big play, a touchdown. I mean, you know, the stats are pretty impressive for how few of targets and receptions that he has. But for whatever reason, he just, I feel like, hasn't been featured as much in our offense this year as he was in previous years. He hasn't had the same sort of chemistry with these quarterbacks like he did with Alex Magoo. And I would really like to see that change. I think Houston's defense, again, they have a really great front seven. I think they're slightly weaker in the secondary. And so I think if we could get some play action, get some opportunities for Jace to kind of get behind the linebackers and match up, you know, with some of the Houston secondary, I think that's an advantage we can exploit, and I'd really like to see us get him more involved this week. I think if we can do those things, I like our odds of pulling out the win in this game. I wanted to get through that quickly because I did want to have time to talk about the retirement of, you know, famous, beloved, incredible Stallions linebacker Scooby Wright III. Scooby did suffer a severe neck injury last week at the beginning of the game, and the injury is severe enough that he has decided to hang it up and retire from professional football. He's getting a little bit older. He'll turn 30 this fall. I think coming into the season, he probably thought, or, you know, it seemed like maybe this would be his last kind of go at things, his last crack at things. And after suffering an injury like he did, I think he just knew that it was probably time. But just wanted to quickly kind of recap just to pay him the respects that he's due, the incredible career he's had going back to college. You know, some people may or may not have followed Scooby as much in college because he played in the Pac-12 out at Arizona. He wasn't, you know, in an SEC or an Alabama school or something like that. But if you followed college football closely, you definitely remembered him because he had one of the best seasons a defensive player has had probably, you know, in the last couple decades in 2014. In 2014 at Arizona, he finished the season with 163 tackles, 29 tackles for loss, 14 sacks, 6 forced fumbles, and 1 fumble recovery. That season, he was named first team Pac-12. He was named the Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year. He was a unanimous All-American. He received the Lombardi Award. He also received the Jack Lambert Trophy as the best linebacker in the country. He was also named the Ben-Narek Award winner and Nagurski Award winner as the best defensive player in the country. He actually finished 9th in Heisman voting that year, which was highest of any defensive player in the country. So that just goes to show you what incredible of a college football player he was. And ask anybody from Arizona, they'll be able to tell you all about that. And unfortunately, in some ways, kind of as a preview of what was to come, he actually missed most of his 2015 college season due to injury and ended up going pro after that. And as a pro, he spent his rookie season with the Browns before getting picked up by the Arizona Cardinals and getting to go back to Arizona. He spent his second pro season with the Cardinals, and that was when he really saw the most NFL playing time. He played in 10 games that year, so more than half the season. And then his third year with the Cardinals, he was actually released at the end of preseason, and unfortunately didn't get picked up by another team. But about that time was when the AAF announced that they were going to kick off, and so he was signed by the Arizona Hotshots, got to keep playing professional football out there in Arizona. Did that up until the closure of the AAF, and then in 2020 he played with the DC Defenders. Did that up until the closure of the XFL in 2020. And then in 2022, when the USFL came back, he was drafted in the inaugural USFL sort of roster draft that happened by the Stallions. And, you know, the rest is sort of history. I don't have to go through it all because you know it if you followed the Stallions at all over the last couple of years. But this was his third season with the Stallions, of course, winning 2 championships his first 2 years with us in 2022 and 2023. Statistically, Scooby was, you know, an incredible player. He finishes his time in the USFL/UFL with 80 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, an interception, 5 PBUs, 1 forced fumble, and 1 touchdown. That touchdown, of course, being one of, if not the most iconic plays in recent spring football history in the 2022 championship game with the Stallions coming back after being down in a close game against the Philadelphia Stars. Case Cook is being injured, his backup having to come in, and Scooby Wright stepping in front of a pass and taking it back to the house for a pick six that really sealed the game in that 2022 USFL championship, and just kind of the most fitting, perfect way for that season to end. And, we could talk about the stats, but of course, again, if you followed the USFL, the stats don't really capture the whole story. SharkDawg was the heart and soul of this team, the heart and soul of the defense. I remember watching that pick six play. My wife and I were actually in Europe at the time. We'd planned a European vacation, before the USFL was sort of back, and we didn't know we would have a reason to be in America in mid-July in 2022. But I remember I was sitting on a bus. We were in Scandinavia riding the bus. I was, somewhere in Sweden or Norway. And of course, they're 7, 8, 9 hours ahead of our time here. So it was like 4 a.m. there. Everybody else on the bus is asleep. I'm sitting on my phone watching the game and feeling super stressed because we'd been losing a lot of the game, didn't know what was going to happen. And then, Scooby gets that pick six. And I just remember, just wanting to just erupt and cheer and go crazy, but not being able to, because I'm sitting on a bus with a bunch of sleeping Norwegians that would, be very concerned for me if I let out my enthusiastic cries on Scooby's pick six play. So I know, again, if you're a Stallions fan, it's kind of that play is kind of one of those things where it's like you remember where you were when it happened, and that's just one of many stories that we could tell about Scooby. I mean, there's his sort of famous, SharkDawg, sort of monologue that he had or interview that he had after an awesome goal line stand against the Breakers. He helped force a fumble his first game in 2023 against the Generals in the opening game of that season. I think everybody has, people were tweeting about them after he announced his retirement, but everybody has stories that they remember of Scooby, both on the field, but also off the field. I mean, I remember, Scooby, there's video, if you go back and watch, the USFL did sort of a player, kind of like the XFL did a Player 54 sort of docu-series. The USFL did something similar in 2022, and there's clips on there of Scooby riding around Birmingham on a scooter and leaving practice or showing up to practice on a scooter. And I remember I actually was leaving the gym one day and driving over to Publix to grab something from the grocery store and saw Scooby going into Smoothie King and shouted him out, said hey, and he just developed such a deep kind of emotional connection with the city of Birmingham and with the fans. I mean, from his first year with the team, we had people dressing up in, Scooby outfits, SharkDawg outfits, wearing the Scooby chains and that sort of thing. And, I think Scooby will always sort of be an honorary Alabamian and sort of Birmingham native for the years to come, for as long as he's around, and hope he can stay involved with the team in some capacity, kind of like a Bo Scarborough who retired early this year. I mean, those are guys that did so much, not only in terms of their performance on the field, but in terms of establishing the culture of the team, building the fan base, connecting with the city, giving back. And, just couldn't say enough good things about him. It hit me hard to hear that he was retiring. And unfortunately, he has struggled with injuries over the last couple of years. If you remember, in 2022, he missed a couple games with some calf issues, and then really missed most of the season last year. Really only played, I think, in 2 games in the regular season, and just barely got back in time to play in the postseason. And then got off to a good start this year. Played in the first couple games and started at linebacker, obviously middle linebacker for us again, but had a pretty severe neck injury that is going to keep him out probably at a minimum for the rest of this year. And then I think with his age, with his injury history, I think he just feels like it's time to move on. And he told me he's considering coaching. He's also looking at maybe getting back into being a firefighter, which he was doing previously before the USFL started back up. So also, I've seen some people talk about, maybe getting him involved in media, either with the UFL or other sports things, or I know he's been interested in the WWE. So whatever he does, he's going to be successful. I can't wait to see whatever it is, whatever it's going to be. We can't wait to see it. But we just wanted to say, or I wanted to say, and I think I can speak for all Stallions fans when we say that we love you, Scooby. We're so thankful for you. Thank you for everything you did for this city, for this team. And we hope we can get you that 3rd ring, even if you're not able to be out there on the field when it happens. So Thank you again, SharkDawg. We'll never forget you. And talking about injuries, talking about what's been going on. One thing that, I'm always trying to kind of solicit feedback, and always am open to hearing ideas and suggestions. Again, I'm not a professional at this. I'm just kind of dipping my toes in the water. So if you have ideas or things, please let me know. And one of the things that several people kind of mentioned to me that they would enjoy on the show is if we had a little bit of a recap of what's going on in terms of the Stallions roster, sort of who can play, who's injured, do we sign new players? What's the depth chart like? All those kinds of things. And so I'm actually, heard those requests. I think it's a great idea. And so I'm going to add a new segment to the show that I'm going to kind of do each week before the game called Roster Report, where we sort of break down what's going on with the Stallions roster. So I've divided the roster report up into 5 sections, and we'll go through each one of those now and for the remaining weeks of the season moving forward. And the first section is new players that the Stallions have signed. We actually signed a punter this week to fill in for Colby Wadman, who we'll talk about in a second, but we signed Drew Chrisman out of Ohio State. He spent multiple years with the Cincinnati Bengals, really solid punter, and also a fantastic social media follow. He makes hilarious content, so I definitely encourage you to follow him if you're not doing that, but excited to see what he can do this week. He will be active and playing for us. And then we also signed defensive back Juju Hughes out of Fresno State, who's spent some time in the NFL, actually won a Super Bowl with the Rams a couple of years ago, and picked him up in place of Chris Jackson, who, again, we'll also talk about in a second. But those are the 2 new guys that we brought in to the team. Didn't release or waive anyone this week, which is always a positive. Unfortunately, we did have to move some guys onto the IR, so we now have 5 players on injured reserve. 2 of those should be coming back relatively soon. So defensive tackle Willie Yarberry went on IR during training camp, before the regular season really started. So if I did my math correctly, I think he should be back and available next week if the Stallions decide to activate him next week. Offensive guard Deontay Brown, graduate of the University of Alabama, he was put on IR at the end of March. So after that first game, that week 1 game against the Renegades, I think he also should be able to come back within the next week or 2. So be on the lookout for him, maybe being back. Hopefully he can be back for that home game against the Battlehawks on May 11th, definitely by then. And then we had to move 3 players onto IR. So everybody knows about Chris Blewett. He thought maybe he was only going to have to miss a week, and Ramiz Ahmed was just sort of a temporary solution, but it's a severe enough injury that he's actually going to have to miss several weeks, potentially the rest of the season. We'll see. Skip said it was a 6 to 8 week injury, but he is now on IR, and Ramiz Ahmed is now our full-time active roster kicker. And then, as I just mentioned a second ago, cornerback Chris Jackson also has been placed on IR and will miss 5 weeks. And then, as we discussed, Scooby Wright, technically he's been placed on IR, I think, sort of on the off chance that there's maybe some way they could get him back at the end of the year. But the way Scooby at least has talked about his injury, he's done and retired, but he remains on the IR list for the Stallions at this point. So 5 guys on IR. And then the fourth thing I want to cover here is who's going to be inactive in the upcoming game. So some you might expect, some you might be surprised by. Jamar Smith remains inactive as the 3rd string quarterback. The surprising one, maybe for some of us, is running back CJ Marable, who's been the Stallions starting running back for now 3 years and got off to a really great start to begin the year, but was actually kind of bottled up the last 2 weeks. He didn't practice all week, and it was for personal reasons, so he's not hurt as far as I know. When we've had guys miss games for personal reasons in previous weeks, it's been things like a wedding, the birth of a child, other kind of family-related things. So I don't know specifically what's going on with CJ. It's not really my business, but something personal in his life or with his family, whatever the case may be, has kept him away from the team this week, and he's not been able to practice, and so he's not going to play in this game. Hopefully he'll be back next week, but we'll see about that. We'll talk about in a second his replacement and who's going to be filling in for him, but he will be inactive this week. Isaiah Zuber will be inactive. Marlon Williams is back. And then offensive tackle Armani Taylor is going to also be out. He suffered a concussion, unfortunately, and is going to have to miss this week. And then on the defensive side, Jalen Twyman will be inactive again. Ike Brown is inactive for, I think, the 4th week in a row now after an injury that happened at the beginning of the year. But he did practice all week, so that's a really positive sign. He should hopefully be back next week, I'm assuming. And then Juju Hughes, of course, who just joined the team, will be inactive. And then Colby Wadman, who is also injured, will be inactive. I'm not sure the severity of his injury. They brought Drew Chrisman in, but haven't necessarily said yet how long they expect Colby to miss. So it could be a situation where he's just out for a week or 2 and then is back, or it could be a situation like with our kicker Chris Blewett, where he has to be put on IR and miss a large portion of the season, and then Drew Crispin might sort of take over. So we'll have to monitor that situation. And then the final sort of section of this roster report I wanted to go over is the depth chart for the game. So on the offensive side, a couple things worth noting. Adrian Martinez is listed as QB1. Skip didn't really say this week who exactly was going to start or how he was going to play the guys or who was going to split time or anything like that. So I'm not exactly sure what the plan is. I do know that Matt did suffer a minor ankle injury in the game last week. And so he was limited in practice at the beginning of the week, but he was good to go the last couple of days. So I think he's ready to play if needed. So we'll have to see. I don't know if because of that injury that sort of gave Adrian the start, or if Skip was planning on starting Adrian anyway because of his week 3 performance. Either way, Adrian's the starting quarterback. Matt is available and can play. We'll have to see if they decide to split time with those two guys or if they just stick with one. Remains to be seen. And as far as the offensive line, get a couple guys back, which is good. Christian DeLauro missed last week, struggling with an injury, as did Cole Schneider. And you could really tell, I think, that their absence hurt us. So it's great to have them both back and starting. Because Alex Taylor is out, Matt Caskey will start at right tackle. And then at the running back spot, Ricky Person Jr. will get his first start for the Stallions, either last year or this year, with C.J. Marable missing the game. And then backing him up will be Larry Roundtree III out of Missouri. Was really excited to see him play this year. He was a 6th-round draft pick to the Chargers, was fantastic running back in the SEC at Missouri. Thought he could really maybe be a difference maker for us, but because C.J. Marable and Ricky Person Jr. have played so well, we haven't really got to see him yet at all this year. So this will be the first chance we get to see him, and hopefully that goes well. And then as far as the tight end and receiver spot, it's pretty much what you would expect. On the defensive side of the ball, not too much to note here other than the fact that at the linebacker spot, without Scooby, as expected, DeMarcus Gates and Kiava Tizino will start. They'll be backed up by Elijah Sullivan and Damon Lloyd, who have both been sort of rotating in and rotating games over the last few weeks. And then with Chris Jackson out, who's been playing nickel for us, Lorenzo Burns will sort of bump into that nickel spot and cover receivers in the slot, I think, is the plan. And then Neville Clark and Mark Gilbert will sort of be on the outside as the corners. Otherwise, again, about what you would expect, pretty similar to previous weeks. And then for special teams, again, new kicker and punter, semi-new kicker with Ramiz Ahmed. Obviously, he was there last week, but he'll get another shot this week to build on his success. And then Drew Crispin, who we talked about. And then Gary Jennings will return kicks this week instead of Deion Kane. They've kind of been rotating a little bit there. So this week, it looks like they're going to give the nod to Gary Jennings. So that's it for our roster updates. Let's talk about what's going on in the rest of the UFL and with the Stallions in the Roundup. Not a lot of things to cover here. I want to wrap this episode up, so we'll try and fire through these pretty quickly. Just a couple things to know. Of course, as always, with every away game, there will be a watch party this Saturday night at Back 40 Brewing. So make sure if you're in Birmingham, you come out to that and support the team if you can't make the trip to Houston. Unfortunately, I didn't get to talk about this last week, but I did want to mention that Fox is doing regional broadcasts. They did this last week, so if you're not in Alabama or you live maybe somewhere else in the country, you might have flipped on Fox to watch the Stallions game and noticed that it was actually a different game. They're going to have a similar setup this week, so there will be regional broadcasts like Fox does with the NFL this coming Saturday night again. The good news is that the Stallions will be on 89% of TVs on Saturday night. They released the coverage map. Stallions are in 89% of markets, so most likely, unless you live in Texas or somewhere out on the West Coast or something like that, you're probably going to get the Stallions game on Saturday night. If for some reason you don't, you can watch either game in the Fox Sports app on your phone or wherever you have it downloaded. So know that that is available to you if you kind of run into that hiccup. Most likely you probably won't, but did want to mention that that's something that Fox is trying out this season. As far as the TV ratings for last week, because of that regional broadcast, it was a little bit different. So one game that was on ABC had 954,000, which is obviously a great number, just shy of 1 million there. The regional broadcast, sort of the two games that happened simultaneously on Fox, the Stallions game obviously had that rain delay and that sort of thing. So you might have, while that was happening, you might have watched some of the Michigan San Antonio game. Those two games collectively in that sort of time slot had about 951,000 viewers. So again, just shy of 1 million. However, again, that's split up over 2 games. So, I mean, as far as how you sort of count that, how you kind of average that, I don't really know what to make of that. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing for the league. It's a decent number, but again, that's sort of being split up over 2 games. So in terms of the total eyeballs on the product over the course of the weekend, it's actually a good kind of drop off because there's only really 3 games that people are kind of able to watch as opposed to 4. The final game was on FS1 and it had a pretty abysmal 243,000, a shockingly low amount. So the good news is that that's the only game on FS1 this year, so don't really have to worry about it again. They tried it. That didn't seem to work for whatever reason. It wasn't, it was the Arlington-Houston game, so 2 teams that haven't won a game yet this year. That probably didn't help. But again, thankfully, that's sort of in the past. But that did definitely cause the average ratings to sort of drop a little bit this week. And shout out to UFL Expert on X. He's a great Stallions fan and active on social media. And I think he made a really good point that I think it's fair to say that people are maybe not always actively seeking out the UFL, but they're not turning it off when it comes on, right? Like when it's on broadcast, when it's on ESPN, when it's on channels that people watch regularly, people are watching it and seem to be tuning in. When it's on a channel like FS1, where people maybe sort of have to more go out of their way to find it or get it or plan to watch it, then the numbers really drop off. So I think, there's good and bad there, right? Like it could be better. People could be more sort of actively seeking it out and being more intentional about watching it. But also the good news is that people aren't actively turning away from it, right? Like when it's sort of put in front of them, they're staying tuned in. So I think there's some good things there. And so there's obviously some things for the league to grow. As far as attendance for week 4, not really great across the league. I mean, St. Louis, of course, had fantastic attendance, just shy of 32,000 people, which was a drop off from them from the week before because they had over 40,000 or their previous game. But they also went head to head with the Cardinals, who obviously have a solid following in St. Louis. So really impressive number overall for them, still, all things considered. And then San Antonio was second with just over 11,000. They've kind of been hovering around that 11 to 13,000 mark pretty consistently. Birmingham was third with 7,576 fans. Was definitely disappointed in that number. I was hoping it would be more, but I think, not as an excuse. We've been getting roasted for making excuses, but not as an excuse, but just as a fact. I think people did know that there was a severe thunderstorm coming in. It did cause the game to be delayed for obviously a significant amount of time. And so that certainly did not help attendance, I don't think. But the next game is going to be May 11th. At home against the St. Louis Battlehawks, which is shaping up to be a huge game. 2 of the best teams in the league. A.J. McCarron, the former Alabama quarterback, is going to be making his sort of professional football homecoming to the state of Alabama, his first game here as a professional football player. So you definitely don't want to miss that one. And I would challenge everybody. I think all of us have probably at least one, if not several. I mean, I know I have several friends who are diehard Alabama fans, but who are maybe not very aware of or don't really follow the Stallions. And this would be a perfect game to invite them to get people out there. If all of us who go to the Stallions games regularly just brought one extra person with us and we could sort of double the attendance, then we'd be looking at, 15,000 or more fans at the game, which I think would be a great turnout. So let your friends know, especially your Alabama fan friends know, A.J. McCarron is coming to town. It's going to be, again, 2 of the best teams in the league. Huge game. And we need everyone there supporting the Stallions. And let's try to get up to that 15 to 20,000 number of people that should be there for this game. Like I know we can. And then Houston had the lowest attendance at just over 7,000. So a little bit lower average overall for the week. Again, if you sort of factor out the outlier of St. Louis, but that's where we're at. And then power rankings heading into this final week, just real quick, I had Birmingham still at number 1, obviously is the only undefeated team. St. Louis at number 2. Their offense is really kind of starting to click, and they definitely look like a scary team, sort of a force to be reckoned with. San Antonio at 3, who's also 3-1. They're a great team. I'm not sold on them to the same degree that I am St. Louis, so I had them at 3. The 4 and 5 was really tough for me. I've got Michigan at 4, DC at 5. Both teams are 2-2. I could have kind of gone either way, flipped a coin on that one, but I just feel like I've seen some things out of DC in the year that kind of concern me a little bit more than Michigan. I think Michigan is a really solid team. I think they're just kind of struggling to be consistent on offense. And, but when they've been able to kind of figure that out, they've looked pretty scary. So, again, that's nothing to take away from DC. They've looked really, really strong at times too. But again, I could kind of flip a coin on those, but I had DC at 5, Michigan at 4. And then 6, I actually had Houston, who sort of trending up and got their first win. 7, Memphis, who still only has 1 win and has been kind of trending down for me. I was kind of high on them, but they keep letting me down, so I'm getting off the boat, so to speak. And then last would have to be Arlington, who has yet to win a game despite the fact that they have Bob Stoops as their head coach, Luis Perez as quarterback, several other great football players. They just can't figure things out there, and so got them at 8. And then lastly, some predictions for the week. Again, just real quick, I already made my prediction on the Stallions game, but as far as the other games, I'll just pick up where I just left off there with Arlington. Arlington's playing San Antonio. I'm going to go on a limb here and just go crazy, and I'm going to take Arlington. I don't know why. In my gut, I have a feeling that Arlington's finally going to get a win. They've had some bad breaks. They've lost some close games. Again, I'm not super high on San Antonio. I think they're a great team, but I think they're vulnerable. And I think they might come into this game kind of sleepwalking a little bit, just assuming it's going to be an easy W against Arlington. So I don't know. I'm going out on a limb. I'm going to take Arlington. We'll say 27 to 23. Michigan and Memphis. I'm going to take Memphis in this one. Again, I could kind of maybe go either way on this one. It really just depends on which Michigan team and specifically which Michigan offense shows up. EJ Perry is on IR now, so Danny Etling is going to be quarterbacking them, but he actually looked pretty good, in my opinion, last week at times. So I think Michigan pulls it out, but I could definitely be wrong about that one. I don't feel super confident about them, but we'll say I don't think it's going to be super high scoring. We'll say Michigan wins 22-14. And then as far as the other game, kind of probably the biggest game in some ways of the week, St. Louis and DC. I'm going to go with the upset on this one and go with DC. DC's getting St. Louis at home. Again, they've lost a couple close games. I think they really need a win to not fall further behind in terms of the standings on the XFL conference side. And, they haven't lost a game at home yet. And I just feel good about their odds of pulling it out. I think it's going to be a close game, maybe come down to a final field goal or something like that. I'm going to go DC. We'll say, let's say 26-24. So I think the DC defense forces a couple turnovers. They can create some points off that, maybe get a field goal late to win. So there you have it, folks. That's all for this week. Thank you again for tuning in. I do want to shout out, I've got my Minnesota Myth shirt on here, sweatshirt. Move there so you can see it. The AFL, if you do like arena football, indoor football, the AFL is kicking off this upcoming weekend, and they got off to a little bit of a rocky start here, but I'm excited for that. Shout out to the Birmingham Steel Dogs. They're not around anymore, of course, but at least maybe one day they'll get to come back. I lived in Minnesota before I moved to Alabama, so for the time being, I'm going to support the Myth. So check out the AFL this weekend. Their games will be streaming on their app and on their website, if that's sort of your cup of tea. But otherwise, definitely enjoy the UFL games. Big game against Houston. Hopefully we can get the W, move to 5-0 on the season, and can't wait to talk about it on Monday. Giddy up.